With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right, even if the whole world is telling you to move, it is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being here on Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. Thank you for being here with us on the program. It is, of course, a very big day because this is like Christmas to political junkies like myself. It is the eve of an election day. Now, granted, there's not a whole lot of races going on because this is specifically the runoff election. We actually already had the regular primary, and in the state of Alabama, the way that our laws work, if you cannot secure more than 50% of the vote, then you have to go up against you have to pit the top two against one another if you're not able to secure at least 50% of the vote in the primary. And so that happened a couple of times with the Senate race and the race for District 2 of the state of Alabama after Martha Roby vacated her seat. But before we get into the actual races, and of course that is going to be the bulk of our program this evening, talking about those races, I wanted to bring this up really quickly. Attorney General Steve Marshall has actually issued a statement regarding masks and the various ordinances, which of course very much really affects us here in the city of Montgomery because of course there is a mask requirement. Now, I don't think that it's actually legal. I haven't been obeying it myself. I frankly don't care. I'm doing it out of sheer rebellion, even in places I normally would wear a mask at this point, because the way that Mayor Reed handled that, he just made himself into a mini dictator. But that's a topic for another show. Already covered that on an episode. Attorney General Marshall, though, did issue a statement regarding masks and the requirements. And this is what he said, quote, "It is clear that the state law does not allow for an individual's qualification to vote to be contingent upon the wearing of a mask or face covering, respecting social distancing, using gloves, or having a temperature in a normal range." So in other words, if you do have people at the polling places that say, oh no, you can't vote here because you're not wearing a mask, you can't vote here because you don't have gloves, let's take your temperature, click, nope, it looks like you've got a slight fever, so you're not allowed to vote here. Nope, completely illegal if that is the case. Whether it's indoors or whatever, and I imagine just about every polling place is indoors. If there's an outdoor polling place in the state, I don't know of it. But regardless of the circumstances, Attorney General Marshall, the top law enforcement officer in the state of Alabama, says, can't do that with voting. If somebody shows up, mask or not, they're allowed to vote. You cannot steamroll over somebody's right to vote just because you're afraid of them not having a mask on. John Merrill, who is, of course, the Secretary of State, he's the officer, the constitutional officer in charge of running the elections, basically echoed exactly the same thing. He said that his office had received multiple inquiries about this, if they had to enforce laws or mandates in the local municipalities, ordinances that would go against that. So if like in the in the city of Montgomery, since there is a mandatory mask ordinance indoors for gatherings of more than 10 people, that even if they have that, if you come in to vote and you don't have a mask, nobody is allowed to turn you away from your polling place because you're not wearing a mask. So just before we get into the meat and potatoes of the election, just know that ahead of time that you are not able to do that. Now, here's the thing. Personally, and again, I've got a personal vendetta against the way that this whole thing has been handled. I don't like the fact that the government is coming down and mandating these things, but wearing a mask inside, especially in large groups, is a good idea. If you're not going to be able to socially distance yourself from people, it's not a bad idea to be wearing a mask when you are indoors. Outdoors, really not so much, but if you're indoors, this is actually a smart idea, and I'm not against the mask themselves. So if you do happen to want to, on your lunch break or whatever, swing by and vote, all I'm saying is if somehow you left your mask at home or you didn't remember it or whatever, don't let that stop you from voting. If you want to wear one as common courtesy, and I certainly do, usually just if nothing else to make other people comfortable. Like, I know right now that I don't have it. I've, been very careful, not come in contact with people that even potentially have it. The only people that I have come in contact with, ironically enough, today that I'm aware of, all of them have been tested for the virus, and not a single one of them has come up positive, and this is in just the past couple days. So, very confident that I don't have it, but it's a good idea to wear the thing, if nothing else, just to make everybody else feel comfortable. But if you don't have a mask, can't find one right then, don't let that stop you from voting. And if anybody does try to stop you from voting, I mean, tell them that the Attorney General and the Secretary of State have both said that you cannot prevent somebody from voting because of that. So just keep that in mind as you're going to your voting places tomorrow. So, former Attorney General Jeff Sessions is going up against Tommy Tuberville in the runoff tomorrow. And this is one that I think Jeff Sessions has a little bit of an edge on. Granted, not as much as I thought that he would. I thought that once this thing was a two-person race, that Jeff Sessions would have it pretty handedly. Because when it comes to these runoffs, usually you'll have a coalescing of the candidates. Because here's the thing, in America, this is an unfortunate truth, but it is the truth. We tend to vote for, we don't tend to vote for things, we tend to vote against things. And when you tend to vote against things, usually what happens in these runoff elections is that vote that didn't go for the guy that won tends to start rallying around the guy who didn't win, and actually coming in second place if you wind up in a runoff, not a bad position to be in most of the time, because the remainder of that vote that was more than 50%, because obviously if the other guy had gotten 50%, he wouldn't be in a runoff in the first place in our state. Usually what happens is the majority of those voters start rallying around the number two guy, and it's not uncommon for the number two guy to win in a runoff like this. So with Jeff Sessions and Tommy Tuberville, since they had a relatively close race, I figured that this would be the more contentious and that Jeff Sessions would be the one that would be very, very difficult to beat. I figured that he would go out with this pretty handedly, but Tommy Tuberville has still maintained a substantial lead. It's not like it's already over. I mean, Sessions is definitely within striking distance. But, Tommy Tuberville has had a much stronger showing than I really expected for him to. So I'm going to go over both of the candidates and sort of give you my take on it. First of all, with Tommy Tuberville, full disclosure, I'm an Auburn alumnus. I graduated from Auburn in 2013. I'm a huge Auburn fan, and I was a fan of Tommy Tuberville, not just because he gave us 6 back-to-back victories against Alabama, which I'll always be thankful for, but also just because I thought he was a good guy, a good coach. I always really admired him and appreciated him. In fact, I hated it when they fired him. I know a lot of Auburn fans were ready to get Tuberville out of there and get somebody new in, but I was genuinely upset when they fired Tommy Tuberville. I really wanted Tommy Tuberville. I thought that he deserved to continue to be our coach for at least another couple of seasons to see if things were going to improve. That's neither here nor there, though. That was a long time ago. And it's really not relevant, but I wanted to lay all that all on the table so people really do know where I'm coming from, full disclosure on that. First of all, I'm going to hit some of the dumbest arguments, and this is something that unfortunately the Sessions camp has come out with and played up to, which I thought was kind of a mistake on their part. The carpetbagger argument is dumb. I get that in the state of Alabama, there is sort of a general sense of, we don't like people from the outside telling us what to do. I get that. I understand that. And to a degree, I even feel it somewhat. But really, that he qualified. He met the minimum qualifications of how long you have to live in the state before you can run for office. If you don't like that, that is an argument for changing the law not necessarily just an argument against Tommy Tuberville. I don't have a problem with the fact that he hasn't lived in Alabama his whole life. He lived in Auburn for 10 years while he was the head coach. He does have some roots here. They don't go quite as deep as Jeff Sessions, but the whole carpetbagger insult, that's just dumb. I don't really even get that one. I don't understand why that would be a factor in deciding who you are going to be voting for. But one thing that is kind of an oddity, and I've noticed that virtually every Tommy Tuberville supporter, with the exception of a few that I can think of right off the top of my head, I can only think of a couple where this has been the case. That Tommy Tuberville, they all seem to make a really big deal about him being a political outsider. Which, first of all, being a college football coach in the state of Alabama isn't exactly being an apolitical being. I mean, you're the head of an institution that funnels millions of dollars every year throughout our state. It's one of the most powerful, and keep in mind, these are government state schools. So the idea that you're not a politician when you're a head coach in Alabama, and I mean, that's especially true at Auburn and Alabama, but it's even true to a great degree at schools like Troy and ASU. Like, you may not be on as big a playing ground, but you're at least as much a politician, I would say, as a vast majority of our bureaucrats, even to some degree our elected officials in the state of Alabama. I mean, I think that I am not overstating it, and I have stories that could back this up, that right now, Coach Nick Saban has more power in the state of Alabama than Governor Ivey does. I really don't have any reservations in saying that. That he wields more political clout and influence than the governor of our state. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Whoever the head coach is at Auburn, less so because there's less Auburn fans and there's less Auburn faithful. But either way, I mean, the idea that a former head football coach is not a politician, I mean, I guess in some ways he's not as much as other people that have held office. And I would say that if I'm gauging the two of them, Tommy Tuberville has had less time as a politician and definitely in not as big a capacity or on as big a stage as Jeff Sessions. But the idea that he's a political outsider is frankly just not true. If you really look at it effectively, he is a politician just like the head football coaches of the public schools are politicians, at least to some degree. They're at least at the level of bureaucracy. But the thing that bothers me about Tuberville, the thing that does get under my skin about him, is that basically his answer for everything is, I like Trump. And that's just not a policy position for things. I mean, every answer that he gives when he's asked a question, it's basically like, well, I really like Trump, and I think we should do whatever he says. I don't want a yes man as a senator. Sometimes Trump makes mistakes. He's a fallible human being. And there's some things that I really disagree with him on. There's a lot that I do agree with him on. There's a lot, and he wound up governing far more conservatively than I ever thought he would in the election. But the point is, even now, President Trump makes some pretty big missteps. Just this week, and I don't have time to go off into all the details because we're dealing with the local election here, but just this week he talked about a pathway for the Dreamers, and while I agree with that as a policy proposal, I don't think that now's the right time. I don't think that's something that you handle before you get the border under control. But it sounds like Tommy Tuberville would just be like, whatever Trump wants to do, that's what I'm going to do. I don't want people to be carbon copies of the president. That's why we have a separation of powers, is because the senators are not supposed to be in lockstep with the president. Now, when the president's right, I want the Senate to agree with him, sure. But the president can be right or wrong, and it's never a good idea for anybody to just basically pledge their loyalty to somebody and, well, whatever that person says, that's going to be my political belief. I beg people, personally, don't do that with me. I'm a political commentator, but I don't know everything. And I'm sure that I could name off things that I've gotten wrong in the past. There are things I know I'm going to get wrong in the future. I appreciate that people value my opinion and want to listen to me. But ultimately, you know, I don't want people to just go like, yeah, Caleb seems to pretty much say things that I agree with, and he seems pretty smart. I'll just go with whatever he says. Please don't do that. I do not want that kind of responsibility, and frankly, I don't think that I have that kind of power. Oh, this is funny. My dad actually just commented, John from Millbrook, Saban could run for dictator of the state and he would win. Yep, exactly to my point. And again, I'm not saying that should count against Tommy Tuberville. I'm just saying that him being not a politician. I don't think that that's really a fair criticism there, or a fair. It shouldn't be used as a point in his favor when the guy's no stranger to politics, and it's no different in the other states that he's coached in. That as a football coach, you are a different kind of politician, but you are a politician. There's politics in college football for sure. Anywhere that there's going to be multi-billion dollars running through an industry, there's going to be a fair bit of politics, especially when you're working for a government entity as a part of that. Another thing that does sort of stick in my craw when it comes to Tuberville is that he refused to debate. That's always a point of contention with me. And it's a point of contention even when it's people that I genuinely like. And there have been times where there are politicians that I like that refuse to debate. That's a sign of weakness. That's a sign of somebody deciding they're basically going to, let's use a football analogy here, I'm going to run out the clock on them. And I think that's what Tuberville is trying to do. He sees that he's got a lead in the polls, and I think that he knows that Jeff Sessions, frankly, just knows these issues way better than he does, and that he'd get destroyed in a debate. And so he's like, it's very high risk, very little reward. There's very little chance that it's going to improve my chances of getting elected, so I'm just going to hide and not debate him. And Jeff Sessions has called for that debate multiple times. And Tommy Tuberville is cowering away from that because he'd a lot rather just do some really easy basic running plays so that there's little chance that he fumbles the ball or throws an interception. He's just trying to ride out that clock as long as he can because he knows that he's ahead on the scoreboard, which from a political standpoint is smart. And I said exactly the same thing with Governor Ivey. I think that it's bad. I think that it's wrong. I think the people that are going to be voting for you deserve to see you in a debate with your opponent. I think that that's the right thing to do. But from a political strategy standpoint, it's smart. From a political strategy standpoint, if I were working for Governor Kay Ivey in that election, I would have told her to do exactly what she did, which is avoid all media and debate as possible. And in Tommy Tuberville's case, if I were advising him right now, I'd say, Coach, don't debate. Because the truth is, Jeff Sessions is probably going to destroy you in that debate, and there's almost no chance that it's actually going to help you in the polls. You're ahead right now. Just hang into that holding pattern. Do not debate Jeff Sessions. And so I think that that's what's going on, but it is a cowardly way to run it really is a cowardly way to run a campaign, and the people deserve better. The people deserve to see you debate. Now, this is another thing. If Tommy Tuberville is such a political outsider, how is it that he wound up raising $3.18 million versus Jeff Sessions $2 million? Now, granted, Jeff Sessions has been a politician for a long time. The guy has a war chest, and so he was able to actually spend more money than Tommy Tuberville because he had a lot left over. He's wound up spending roughly $4 million-ish. So when it comes to spending, they're not quite neck and neck. Sessions spent more, Tuberville raised more, but the question is, if Tommy Tuberville is such this political outsider that just doesn't have any attachments to anybody when it comes to politics, how do you raise so dang much money? Because looking at the average amount of his donations, he didn't raise all that from individual donations. I mean, of course, some of it came from that, and some of Jeff Sessions came from that. But he didn't raise $3.18 million mostly on small donations from donors, out there. So a lot of that money is Washington money. Let's just be perfectly frank about it. And again, I'm not saying that that necessarily is a point against him. I don't necessarily think that it's a great thing to be a political outsider. We've had some success with electing political outsiders, some failures with that. Some people that don't really know what they're doing and can't be effective at their job because turns out they were a political outsider for a reason. I'm just saying that if he's going to play to this shtick that, one of my big selling points is I'm a political outsider, it's sort of hard to make that case when you're sitting on $3.18 million in donations and you're raising far more money than your opponent who has been in the Senate for, 20-something years now before he wound up, resigning, of course, to be Trump's attorney general. That's a little sketchy. And I thought the biggest thing going for Tuberville is that he, regardless of how you felt about him politically, he seemed to be a pretty nice guy, a pretty honest guy, a pretty honorable guy, a person of integrity. And I never in any way, because I never had any reason to, suggested that he was anything less than honest, less than above board and all that. I never suggested, even though I thought Jeff Sessions was the better candidate, and we'll go over some of that in a second, even though I thought Jeff Sessions was the better choice in this race, I never at any time impugned his integrity. I always thought he was a good stand-up guy. I have reason to believe that that may no longer be the case. And this really flabbergasted me. I never expected this. This is the records from the state of Indiana where, of course, Tommy Tuberville was registered to vote prior to him moving to the state of Alabama. And you have to remember that one thing that he has claimed no less than at least 8 times in the different radio interviews he's done, still sore about that because he's done other radio interviews, but he never did interview with me no matter how many times I asked his campaign to and actually got in touch with his campaign staff, promised me an interview, never did get back with me. But let's go ahead and look at Tommy Tuberville's record. Whoa, that's the wrong graphic. That's from Thursday. There we go. All right, so what you can see here, these are the records from Tommy Tuberville and where he was registered to vote in 2016 because he claimed that he has voted for Trump. Now, I don't necessarily think that he didn't support Trump, and I don't think that that is something that is insincere, but the fact that the big pillar of his campaign is that he is a Trump supporter and claimed multiple times that he voted for Trump seems odd considering when you look at these records, it shows that he actually didn't vote for Trump or anyone else in 2016 because his voter registration was canceled due to inactivity. Now, I don't necessarily think it would be a bad thing for Tuberville to come out and say, look, I was a college football coach. I just wasn't all that interested in politics. It was just kind of a side interest of mine. I really started getting involved in it here in the past few months. If he had said that, that would be fine, but he didn't say that. All indications are he lied to the people of Alabama, telling them that he did vote for President Trump in 2016, when in fact he did not vote for anybody. His voter registration has been canceled. Now, maybe there is some kind of explanation, but I really don't see how you could square those two things, him saying that he voted for Trump and then finding out that his voter registration in the state of Indiana was canceled. Maybe there is, but I don't see it. And that, when those are your two big pillars, really the only pillars, the only things you have going for you in the race is, hey, I'm a political outsider, and you're raising more money than your political insider opponent. And also, I was a big Trump supporter, which, of course, Jeff Sessions was the first senator to actually endorse Trump, but I'm not even a big Trump fan. I didn't vote for him in 2016, and I did vote. I just voted third party. So that's not a deal breaker for me personally, but when that's your big selling point to your audience and it turns out, oh, no, you didn't vote for Trump, and you lied about voting for Trump, that calls into question whether or not Tommy Tuberville has that level of integrity. And again, I'm willing to try to give the benefit of the doubt here. This is the first time that Tuberville's ever given me any reason whatsoever to disbelieve something that he said. I always saw him as a straight shooter and a man of integrity, regardless of what he thought about his football prowess. I always saw him as a good guy. But he has some questions that need answering. And so far, he has not addressed this, even though this news came out, I think, Thursday. I think it was Thursday when this broke, and it turned out that Tuberville did not, in fact, vote for Donald Trump in 2016, despite claiming that he did. When those two big pillars of your campaign come crashing down right before the election, that's not good news for your campaign. Now, on the other side of this, Jeff Sessions, that guy had one of the most conservative voting records in the Senate. And remember that it's easier to have a more conservative voting record in the House. There's a lot more people, and I mean, there's a lot more people in general. We've got over 400 House reps and only 100 senators. So, of course, there would be more people with conservative voting records in the House, by sheer numbers. But even looking at it as a stage of percentage, Jeff Sessions is in the upper echelon of conservative voting records in the Senate, where the vast majority of senators are moderate, maybe center of or right of center, but just barely. The vast majority of senators fall into that category. I mean, even the ones that are more conservative than your John McCain's, most of your run-of-the-mill Republican senators don't really have that conservative a voting record, especially if you're looking at rubrics by Heritage Foundation or Conservative Review or Freedom Works, those kinds of guys. Senators just tend to not have as conservative voting records. But Jeff Sessions actually did. He was, at least when he was a senator, he was in for sure the top 10, if not the top 5 of the most conservative senators in the country. I mean, had an incredibly staunchly conservative voting record, and I don't just mean Republican voting record, I mean conservative voting record. That regardless of how his Republican colleagues voted, he wound up voting very much on the conservative side when it came to things like fiscal responsibility. He has an excellent record on matters of religious freedom, religious liberty, on appointing justices, on the law, on border security. Look, for my entire lifetime, well, maybe not my entire lifetime, but certainly that which I can remember following politics, which has been pretty much the entirety of my adult life, if nothing else, Jeff Sessions was always the guy you go to when you want to ask about the border and immigration reform and that kind of thing. If you want a conservative opinion on how we should handle the border, every senator knew Jeff Sessions is your guy. If you want somebody to lead the charge when it comes to immigration, you go to Jeff Sessions. That's the reason that he went to Donald Trump first. This was a move that I criticized Sessions for and disagreed with him on because I was a Cruz guy. And I found it baffling that Jeff Sessions wound up going for Trump on this, but it was because that was his core issue. And so, very, very conservative voting record, and he, by the way, handled this both as Trump's attorney general and also as a senator, because as the attorney general, he did incredible work on religious liberty cases. When it came to reversing, for example, the United States support of like the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the Little Sisters of the Poor, so on and so forth, a lot of those things were changed. The department actually did a 180, the Justice Department did, under the leadership of Jeff Sessions. He was the one that went through and actually changed a lot of those things. And that is absolutely true with the border and immigration reform. He was the leader on that. And the reason that we were able to, and remember, under Attorney General Sessions, we had dramatic drops in the rates of illegal border crossings. People were finally starting to get the message there is a new sheriff in town, and we're starting to actually get this under control. Unfortunately, since then, it really hasn't. It's kind of picked up back to the level that it was before Trump. I don't blame Sessions or Trump or Attorney General Barr or any of those people on that. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Since we weren't able to do more in the Senate on the legislative side, it kind of ticked back up to normal. But anyway, that's where we are right now, and Jeff Sessions was the leader on all of that. There was a reversal of Obama's catch and release policy, which Jeff Sessions had criticized beforehand, and then actually implemented a reversal of that as the Attorney General. And when it comes to the recusal, I know that that's been a sticking point for people. I've done literally at least half a dozen shows on this. I mean, we've gone over it and over and over it. We found out with the Mueller report, turns out that Jeff Sessions actually saved the Trump presidency, which was interesting, that even though Trump really despises the guy for no apparent reason, actually saved his butt, and his only thanks for that was President Trump basically telling him to stick it. Despite all of that, based on everything that we've seen, the Mueller report basically came up empty, specifically because Jeff Sessions recused himself. They would have had a very legitimate obstruction of justice case had that not happened. And so it's ironic to me that even though Trump continues to bash him for no reason at all, Jeff Sessions absolutely did the right thing in recusing. If he had not done so, not only would he be in violation of not one, but 2 federal laws, but also that would have been a very, very convincing case for Robert Mueller to put forward that President Trump had indeed obstructed justice by his attorney general trying to railroad the special counsel. That, of course, didn't happen because Jeff Sessions had recused himself. And so it really does seem as though that what Senator Sessions, or Attorney General Sessions at the time, what he did there probably saved Trump's bacon. Now, Whether or not they would have gotten 67 senators to go along with it, that's still a long shot. I'm not sure that he actually would have been removed from office. But, I mean, there's no question that vote would have been far more contentious and Trump would have been in way more hot water if it had not been for Jeff Sessions essentially acting as a shield against that from taking place. And one of the oddest arguments that I've seen against Senator Sessions is, well, he was a good senator, but he was a terrible AG. I find it really odd that that's the argument against Sessions, because he's running for Senate. Like, if you thought he was a good senator, but not a good attorney general, that's not a reason to not vote for him in the Senate. I find that really odd rationale. I mean, if he was a good senator and you assert that, then why not vote for him as senator again? Now, there may be other reasons you have for not wanting him to be a senator, but I gotta be honest, I don't get that one. Of course, the main criticism that people have of Senator Sessions is that he's been up there too long, that he is a Washington insider. Look, the Washington insiders, the establishment, they hate this guy. They hate all of the really conservative senators. They hate Cruz, they hate Mike Lee, they hate Rand Paul. I mean, absolutely detest those guys, and they wind up becoming a fly in their ointment, and Senator Sessions was no different. There are people, part of the reason that Tommy Tuberville raised so much more money than Jeff Sessions is because they see this as a golden opportunity to not have a Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions was a pain in the butt for them, and was the entire time, because nothing irritates a moderate, mushy Republican senator like an actual conservative senator, because then constituents can look up and go, well, that guy's doing his job. Why can't you be conservative like him? Believe me, the establishment does not want Jeff Sessions. I don't know how conservative Tommy Tuberville would be, but they know that Sessions will be conservative, and they do not want that guy back. They would do anything to keep him away from Washington. But ultimately, I think that really is a pretty good segue into how I view this race. I see it as being somewhat of a shot in the dark when it comes to Tommy Tuberville. You know, maybe he'll be conservative. Maybe he'll actually do some of the things that he's going to say. Maybe he'll be a Trump yes man, which means that he'll vote the right way sometimes and vote the wrong way other times. Not really sure. I'd really like for him not to be a yes man, but that's probably not a bad estimation of what winds up happening with Sessions. Maybe that happens. Maybe he just becomes another swamp person, and I think that could happen, and he would wind up doing that very quickly. But the point is, it's a giant question mark. It's an unknown. With Senator Sessions, you absolutely know what you're getting. You're going to get a conservative warrior, somebody that's been doing this for decades, knows what he's doing, knows how to navigate, and knows how to communicate that message to other people to help bring them on board. I just think here there's absolutely no contest. Jeff Sessions is the better pick. Now, he wasn't my first pick. Frankly, I wanted to vote for John Merrill, the Secretary of State. He was running in this race originally, and I was going to wind up going for Merrill. Not because I have anything against Senator Sessions, but I'd like to see a younger, fresher face up there. But Tommy Tuberville's not that much younger than Senator Sessions. But ultimately, if it's a contest between a sure thing and a shot in the dark, I think it just makes sense to go for the sure thing. I mean, maybe we look up and maybe Tuberville winds up being super conservative, but why wouldn't we just go with the guy that we know for a fact is going to be conservative if there's a chance that he might not be? That just doesn't really make any sense to me. So, all that being said, a lot of people have asked, well, who has the better chance of beating Doug Jones? Here's my honest assessment of that. Maybe I'm wrong. I was wrong the first time on Doug Jones, so take this with a grain of salt. Roy Moore, like, everything had to line up. The stars had to align exactly right for Doug Jones to beat even Roy Moore, as much baggage as he had. The idea that either one of these candidates is going to lose to Doug Jones is practically non-existent. I really cannot see a scenario. Maybe one exists out there. I don't know. But I really cannot foresee any kind of circumstances happening to align themselves exactly perfectly like they did last time in order for Doug Jones to secure a victory. I just don't see it happening. So that to me is kind of a moot point. I see both of these guys as well. I think that they'll wind up destroying Doug Jones, frankly. I think it's going to be an embarrassing landslide. I just don't see any chance that Doug Jones has to get anywhere close to beating either one of them. And I think that's especially true because there's going to be a lot of people that go out specifically to vote against Doug Jones. There's going to be people that is their primary motivation. Now, it's a presidential election, so I think the presidential election is going to be part of it, but it's ruby red Alabama. There's virtually no chance that President Trump is not going to win this state. So I think what you're going to see happen in the state of Alabama is there's going to be a lot of people that make it a point to go to vote, even though they know their vote probably won't affect the presidential election. They'll do it specifically to make sure Doug Jones does not get in office. And so I do not foresee any way, frankly, for Doug Jones to actually wind up beating either one of them, regardless of who wins this contest. So let's go ahead and go to the next race real quick. Barry Moore versus Jeff Coleman. Now, I'm not going to talk as much about this one because, frankly, I don't think there's as much to discuss. And that's not because it's a House seat or, versus the Senate seat that we just talked about. It's just, to me, this one's way more clear-cut. It's so much easier to make a choice in this one. I can see several of the arguments for Tuberville, even if I wind up not agreeing with them. And yeah, some recent events have caused me to question Tuberville's integrity when it comes to some of the claims that he's been making. But between Barry Moore and Jeff Coleman, I mean, that one's just a no-brainer to me. I think Barry Moore is the clear choice. And if you wonder why, you can go back and watch my live debate, which, by the way, one of the most viewed videos I've had this month. So go back and watch my live debate coverage of them Tuesday night, or just watch the Raw debate without my commentary on it. I don't think you need my commentary to see that there was a clear winner in that debate. I even actually know a couple people that had planned to vote for Jeff Coleman, and maybe they still are. I don't know. I didn't ask. That said, yeah, absolutely. Barry Moore just wiped the floor with him. It wasn't even close. And I mean, that really was the case. In my summary, and I said this in my summary of the debate as well, if you want a pretty good analogy of how this debate wound up showing, what it wound up showing is, I think, something that's been true since the very beginning, but this debate just put a spotlight on it. Barry Moore is the cowboy. Jeff Coleman is the guy that owns a cowboy hat. Now, I'm not saying they're actual cowboys. This is an analogy. And, in Alabama, you might actually have a cowboy like Roy Moore riding to the polls on a horse in his cowboy hat. But no, I'm talking about this figuratively. So Barry Moore is the actual real thing. He's the genuine article versus a guy that owns a cowboy hat and is good at looking like a cowboy, but not so good at actually being one. If you've ever seen like the old Pace salsa commercials where there's that one cowboy that's not actually a cowboy, he's dressed like one, but when they all bust out the salsa, there's like, hey, take mine. And it's like, this is made in New York City, and all the cowboys look up, New York City? Like that. That's the kind of thing you get with Barry Moore versus Jeff Coleman. Barry Moore's the genuine article. Jeff Coleman is the guy that's all hat and no cattle. And so that's kind of the way to look at it. And what I mean by that is, Jeff Coleman has the endorsement of the Farmers Federation. Barry Coleman, that's the second time I've done that. What the heck is that? Where's that coming from? Barry Moore is a farmer who has an ag degree. He's actually done farming before. He actually has a degree in this stuff from Auburn. I mean, you couldn't be more different. I mean, yeah, it's great for Coleman, I guess, that he got the endorsement of the Farmers Federation. But Barry actually knows this stuff. He's actually done it before. It's not just a thing that he can win over for a political campaign. This is something that he's actually lived. When it comes to veterans, for example, Jeff Coleman is really good about talking about how important our veterans are to this district. But Barry Moore's actually done it. He's actually been a veteran, and he currently has a son in the armed forces. And so, of course, he's going to be better attuned to and have a better understanding of what our vets need and how to support them when he's actually been a vet himself and has a son that's in the armed forces now. This is all just political theory to Jeff Coleman, just like the agriculture thing. It's kind of a theory. It's something that he keeps at arm's length. Barry Moore has actually lived this before. And so that's really the big difference in the two candidates. And when it comes to Coleman, he basically has three lines of attack on Barrymore. So I'll go over those really quickly. First of all, he didn't vote for Trump in 2016. We actually just went over that it turns out Tommy Tuberville didn't either. But here's the difference. Tommy Tuberville didn't vote for him because he just wasn't registered, didn't see it as something as important enough to actually go to the polls. Again, I don't see voting for Trump as some kind of big litmus test. I didn't even vote for President Trump in 2016. I went third party. But for people that actually does matter to them, Barrymore was the first elected official in the country to endorse President Trump. And the reason that he did not vote for him in 2016 is because he was in the middle of a session, because he was serving in the Alabama House of Representatives. And he had to make a choice. He could either leave to make a largely symbolic vote for President Trump in 2016, which he knew was not going to make a difference. Trump was going to win Alabama no matter what. He won it by the highest percentage of anywhere in the country right here in the state of Alabama. There was not another state out of all 50 that Trump won a larger percentage of than the state of Alabama. Barrymore knew his vote was not going to change that. But where his vote might actually matter is where he was serving the state of Alabama, or at least his district for the state of Alabama in the state House of Representatives. So he had an option. I can make a symbolic vote that doesn't mean anything, or I can make a vote that will actually make some change in the state of Alabama. And then he decided that that's the thing that he actually needed to do. If I'm picking between those two, I definitely go with the Barrymore approach. I'm going to make the vote that actually makes a difference in the lives of Alabamians. He could have abandoned his job in order to do something completely symbolic that might help his political career later, but he determined that the people of Alabama, the people that he was representing, were more important than that. And so, to me, it's obvious that Barrymore made the right call in that. His second big line of attack is that his biggest donor, the donor to the Moore campaign, did not support Trump in 2016. Well, that's because the super PAC that is now endorsing Barrymore, because he is a conservative, at the time was endorsing Ted Cruz. It's not as though they were in favor of Hillary Clinton or something. They just supported a different candidate, and he didn't see eye to eye with them on that. But now the ones that are backing him, because Barrymore is an actual conservative and they were trying to support a conservative candidate, Ted Cruz campaigned far more conservatively than Donald Trump did. So they were going with who they thought was the most conservative candidate that could win, which, by the way, the same choice that I made. And so that's his big line of attack, that somebody that is now supporting him supported Ted Cruz. I'm sorry, that's weak sauce. Like, even if you were a Trump worshiper that thinks that Trump can do no wrong, this is a really dumb line of attack, because you could even make the argument that Barrymore converted them. That they were supporting Ted Cruz, now they're supporting him. Like, it's a very odd line. I don't really even understand why that would make a difference to somebody. Maybe if you're an ardent Trump worshiper that thinks anybody that wasn't 100% Trump from the very beginning in 2016 ought to be castrated and tarred and feathered and all that stuff, maybe, but that doesn't even seem rational to me, quite frankly. I guess when you've got nothing on the guy, you've got to come up with something, and that's the best that they could do. And another thing, and this is the strangest one to me, is that Jeff Coleman says this 10,000 times anytime he does any kind of public appearance. I'm a businessman, I'm not a politician, and my opponent is a politician. He's a career politician. I don't think that Barrymore actually fits the career politician moniker. He's definitely been a politician before. Like I said, he represented in the state House of Representatives. He represented his district there. But you have to also keep in mind that he actually term limited himself. He said that he would serve no more than 8 years, and then he served 8 years, and then he left. He actually kept his word on that. That doesn't seem like the action of somebody who genuinely wants to be a career politician. If you want to be a career politician, that means that you made your career to politics. Maybe you started out that way, or maybe it came a little bit later, but you decided, okay, politics is going to be my career now, and then you never did anything else. Barrymore had the option of trying to continue to do politics and decided, nah, I'm just going to bow out gracefully here. That's a very odd thing to say of someone who you're accusing of being this entrenched bureaucrat or somebody that is not really a bureaucrat, but an entrenched official that, is just looking out to further his political career, that's a very odd accusation to make for somebody that willingly stepped down from office and didn't pursue it, even though he could have and probably would have won. I just don't understand that at all. And also, the career politician thing is kind of odd considering that Coleman has so far spent $2.25 million where Moore has spent $389,000. So Jeff Coleman, the political outsider, has all these endorsements and has spent 6 times more than his opponent. That doesn't sound like a political outsider to me. I mean, regardless of how you feel about President Trump, most of his donations came from individuals and himself, and he actually underspent his opponent by millions, if not billions of dollars. Well, definitely not billions, millions of dollars. But when it comes to Jeff Coleman, he's supposed to be the outsider, and yet he's spending 6 times more than his opponent, who's supposed to be the consummate insider. That math just doesn't track, I'm sorry. And I think that the bigger thing is that Coleman just comes off as very painted and inauthentic. And for one, his wife did most of his political ads, which was kind of weird. I don't mind the spouse being featured in the ads, but I mean, she straight up did most of the ads without him even being present, which is kind of odd and seems like not really something a leader should be doing. Again, I don't know that that's something that should count against him, but it is at the very least strange. And then there is one of the most cringeworthy ads I have ever seen in my life. You may remember this. I don't remember how long ago this was, but this was the infamous bat ad that the Coleman campaign put out. And I've just got to watch it again because it's so darn hilarious.
I have 3 precious daughters. Every one of their dates growing up got to meet, respect her. With my girl's permission, I'd have a little chat with those boys. We'd talk respect, boundaries, honor, and integrity. If they agreed, they'd sign right here. I protected my girls like I'll protect your family in Congress. Sometimes a little visual aid helps. I'm Jeff Coleman, and I approve this message.
One of the cringiest political ads I've ever seen. Because first of all, it has nothing to do with politics. I mean, absolutely nothing. No political points being made here. Nothing to do with being a representative. And the second thing is, dude, you're a conservative in Alabama. Why the heck would you have a baseball bat instead of a gun? It's just so incredibly authentic. And I mean, that bat is obviously a prop they made specifically for that video. There's first of all, if he had 3 daughters, the chances that they had, maybe 6 signatures on there the entire time they were dating. And the fact that he had the logo printed on the bat, I mean, it's just so obvious. He had this dumb thing made specifically for the political ad. That's nothing but kabuki theater. I very much they probably invented that whole story and made it up right there. Maybe there was some element of truth to it, but the whole big bad dad thing, that's just stupid, and it has nothing to do with politics. But this is the kind of crap Jeff Coleman just does. I don't really get it, but again, it's one of the funniest ads I've ever seen. I think what's actually going to happen here is that if you get Jeff Coleman, he's going to be Martha Roby 2.0. And by the way, unfortunately, his opponent has done this as well, but just lauds praise on Martha Roby and the job that she's done. She was a garbage representative. She was less conservative than the Democrat that she replaced. And I think that Coleman's pretty much going to be a warm body that votes president or does whatever the current, I guess, minority leader in this case, but whoever the leader of the Republicans is, when they ask him to jump, he's going to ask how high. He's probably going to be exactly like Martha Roby in that regard. And remember that he's trying to talk about being accessible like Martha Roby was, which is another crock of crap because there was nobody less accessible than Martha Roby. But when it comes to that, he'll probably wind up, I would guess, he'll probably wind up doing exactly what Martha did, which is the second he gets elected, he runs and hides. He didn't even agree to a debate until Barry Moore was within striking distance, and he basically had to, or he was going to lose the election because he knew all the momentum was going in the opposite way. This dude has been hiding since day one. He tried to do exactly the same thing that Tuberville did, we were talking about a second ago, where he was just going to ride out the clock, and then he realized, oh, wait a second, they're probably going to score another touchdown. We got to do something. We can't just sit on our thumbs and hope that nothing bad happens anymore. So he finally did agree to actually do a debate, but he's missed the past 5 GOP meetings. I mean, the guy just doesn't, he's already not accessible, and he's not even elected yet. Wouldn't come on my show, even though I made multiple requests for him. And unlike Tuberville, who just went on a whole bunch of other shows and not mine, I don't even think Jeff Coleman's done a whole lot of media interviews, or at least not ones that I've seen. So I think that he's just going to be another Martha Roby if he winds up getting elected. One thing I will say, though, is, got my buddy Chip. He's saying that I prefer to have a pump shotgun when I have those discussions. See, exactly. Like, granted, I don't think that kind of discussion, I don't know, it's not really my thing. Granted, I'm not a dad. I don't have daughters, and so I'm not really qualified to talk on that. But yeah, if you're a conservative in Alabama, why would you not use a gun? Why would you use a baseball bat? That's like something a Nancy up north would do. But anyway, nonetheless, one thing I do really hate about both of these races is they've become so Trump-centric. Like, Jeff Sessions is trying so hard to win over the Trump voters and suggest that he's, a Trump supporter, which, I mean, he is technically, looking at everything that's happened. And really, it should be more about the principles than a person. I don't like this sort of blind loyalty, or even mostly blind loyalty, to where maybe there is some bridge that I won't cross, but I'll pretty much do whatever this person says or whatever this person likes, I'm going to go with. It bothers me that our political universe in the state of Alabama, and really the whole country over, because even in blue states, that it's very Trump-centric. It's like, who can hate Trump the most when it comes to their races. I just hate that our political universe has become so incredibly Trump-centric, and it's become so focused on one person, because I think that means that the issues have largely lost out on this. And I've tried to stay very issue-centric. I've tried to talk more about the issues themselves, that it's hard to do because the candidates themselves have tried to make this race all about who can like Trump the most and the hardest. And it really is a sad commentary on the state of our politics this day and age. There's been a lot of things that Trump has done that I've liked. There's been some things he's done that I didn't like. But ultimately, it's about the principles and what actually takes place, what actually happens, rather than the person himself. And I hate the fact that our elections have largely become whether you like the president or whether you don't like the president, and how hard the person can like or dislike the president. It just bothers me that virtually everything in politics has become centered around one person. That's not healthy for the country, because human beings are inherently flawed. And it causes an awful lot of people to agree with things that he might do that are not smart. And it also causes the other side of the country to disagree with common sense things that he says that are 100% correct. And so it's really just bad on both fronts. All right, so what we'll do is we'll take a quick break here. We'll be back with the Daily Dose of Stupid right here on Tactics.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
Hey everybody, heading south on I-65 between Huntsville and Birmingham, and a thought struck me. I was reading the other night from the Gospel of Matthew, the story where Jesus walks on the water and then Peter requests that Christ let him come out on the water too, and to come towards him. And it's a story that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. The Apostle Peter steps out onto the water, a very bold thing to do, and then all of a sudden he starts getting distracted by the storm that is going on. There's wind, there's waves, there's rain, and he starts looking to the right and the left and seeing how turbulent the sea is, and he takes his eyes off of Christ, and immediately he starts sinking into the water. And I think that says a lot about the way that we're supposed to look at Christ in our life. Everybody has storms. I don't care who you are. I don't care what kind of life that you live, whether you're rich or you're poor, you live in the country, live in the city, whether you've got a lot of family, whether you have virtually no family. Everybody's got storms. Everybody has things in their life that just don't go their way. Things that they have to deal with, whether it's money, whether it's sickness. Something happens to everybody on a pretty regular basis. And I think that where we start going wrong, where we start sinking, is when we start focusing on the waves, we start focusing on the rain, we start focusing on the storms in our life, rather than looking forward at Christ. Now, Peter already knew that the sea was stormy. He was in a boat. He was very aware of the fact that the storm was raging pretty heavy at that point. So, what happened? He started out right, and then when he stopped focusing on Christ and started focusing on the terrible things going on around him, when he started focusing on them and that became the focus, he became afraid and he started sinking. And that's kind of like driving in a lot of ways. If you focus too much on the storm, if you focus on what's going on around you, if you focus too much on the other cars or start looking behind you and worrying about that, then you're going to lose focus on your goal, and you're either going to go in the wrong direction or, unfortunately, much worse, you wind up wrecking. That's obviously not good. And so, just like Peter, I think that the point of that story is that we have to keep our eyes constantly focused on Christ. Are we aware of the storm? Sure. Do we do the best that we can to deal with the circumstances of our life? Absolutely. That's something that the Bible really helps us with. But there's a difference in being aware of the storm and doing something to deal with the storm and focusing on the storm. We focus on Christ. And if we focus on Christ, we have faith in Him that, yes, the storm is there. Yes, we know it's there. But that whatever the storm happens to throw at us, it'll be okay because our focus is on Christ. It's a question of our priorities, and it's also a question of, do you trust God enough to bring you through the storm? And if the answer is yes, then all we have to do is look at Christ, keep ourselves focused on Him, and walk straight ahead. And that is going to be a much better way to live than constantly worrying about whatever new wave or whatever new rain or whatever new wind shows up in our life. Keep our eyes focused on Christ and walking forward so that one day we reach Him.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
And for today's Daily Dose of Stupid, it's got to be this story. I mean, the Washington Redskins renaming their team, really? It's so ridiculous. They did announce today that they're going to be renaming their team, and they're not only changing the team's name from Redskins, so it's not like they're going to change from the Redskins to the Braves or the Indians or something like that. They're actually changing the name and the branding, so there'll be something completely different. A lot of people have suggested the Red Wolves. That's a possibility. I really don't know. They haven't announced that yet, but it'll be something completely unconnected to Native Americans or that kind of branding. They're removing the logo, everything. And this came after just a tidal wave of cancel culture. Sponsors like Nike, which apparently they're the new woke police now, especially after their deals with Colin Kaepernick. FedEx, who's actually has the naming rights to their stadium, said that they weren't going to support the Redskins anymore. Apparently it wasn't racist when FedEx decided to sponsor them beforehand, but it is racist now. So I think that if FedEx actually believes that it's racist, then does that mean that FedEx was supporting racism when they agreed to get the naming rights to the stadium? The city of D.C. actually said that they won't allow them to build a stadium within the city limits unless they change the name. I mean, cancel culture is not only alive, but thriving, especially around the D.C. area. Before we go any further, I do want to say this, full disclosure, just to give you some background on this. I'm not an NFL fan. I doubt I've ever watched an entire quarter of NFL football. I just like college football. It's nothing against the NFL. I don't think that they're evil, should be destroyed or anything like that. I don't think that it's dumb or that their fans are dumb. I just don't get it. I like college ball, never really got into, and part of it's because it's on Sunday and I just can't watch much of it. But I just never really got into the NFL. I like college football better, and I'm really more of a baseball guy anyway. And so I don't really have any skin in this game. Okay, that was terrible. But really, it's not something that really speaks to me, but I do care about the cancel culture, and I care about this specifically because if there was ever an example of how to do this right, in other words, using the Native American imagery and doing it in the correct way, the Redskins are actually a masterclass in that, because if you know the history, you know that this is absolutely in no way something that should be offensive to a Native American, and it turns out that even they don't think that, but we'll get into that in a second. First of all, let's just look at the name on its surface. Let's ignore the football team itself. Is the term Redskin, is that inherently offensive? Well, it turns out if you look at the history, actually no. Because the term Redskin was coined by Native Americans to refer to themselves and to differentiate between white people. And by the way, they normally used it as a term of endearment, and this is one of the things that I find so hilarious, because whenever we're talking about political correctness, the goalpost is always constantly moving, like how back in the day, Redskin was actually used as the politically correct term when they didn't want to use Indian. They didn't like the name Indian because, of course, it referred to, originally, people thought that they were Indians because they thought that America was India. And so that's where that whole thing comes from. That's incorrect, and they didn't like that name as much. So they started referring to themselves as Redskins and referring to non-Native American people as Whiteskins. And so they came up with the name, and then that was seen as the name that they liked. They preferred that white people refer to them as Redskins as opposed to Indians. And so just the term itself, first of all, isn't wrong. They're the ones that came up with it. And what I also find funny is the same woke left that now is saying that it's wrong to be colorblind. This comes from like the 1619 Project and the book White Fragility. They're saying that striving for a colorblind society is actually wrong, and that actually is racist. And so there's nothing wrong with acknowledging a person's skin color. Now, when I say I strive for colorblindness, and I do, and I think that's a good thing, I'm talking about just not making judgments based on a person's skin, not acknowledging that they have different skin than I do. But from the same crowd that is saying that colorblindness now is racist, why would there be anything wrong with acknowledging that a person has red skin? This is the reason that you don't hear me use the term African American, because just like saying Indian, it's technically incorrect. I may use it as a reference point every now and then. I don't think African American is a dirty word, but the vast majority of the black people here in Alabama have been here for longer than a lot of the white people, if you look through their family history. I mean, this is just a fact. Most of them have no connection to Africa. In my life, I've known 2 African Americans. One was an immigrant from Africa who, she was darker complected, but she didn't even really look black. And the other one was just a white guy. He was from South Africa, actually lived not far outside Johannesburg. And so I've actually met 2 actual African Americans. I just refer to it as black because there's nothing wrong with having black skin. Just like there's nothing wrong with having white skin or brown skin or however you want to categorize it. There's nothing wrong with the skin color. And so I don't see a problem with referring to somebody as a red skin because they have red skin. If somebody referred to me as a white skin, that wouldn't bother me. I'm incredibly white. I'm whiter than mayonnaise. So there's that just on the surface. But second of all, so it's just funny to me that the people that are now claiming that color blindness is wrong are saying that it's wrong to refer to somebody by their skin color. That seems like a contradiction in terms. But another thing that's funny too is that everybody tries to go back to prove that this is a racial slur to a ad in a Minnesota newspaper that was offering a reward for any red skin that was brought in, referring to the scalp of Native Americans when they were trying to clear them out for some specific reason. Now, of course, that is horrible. But is it horrible because they referred to them as a red skin? Or is it horrible because they were encouraging and rewarding people for killing other humans? Because to me, that would be the thing to focus on, not the fact that they referred to them as redskin. I'm not saying that nobody ever used the term redskin in a derogatory or demeaning manner, but the vast overwhelming majority of people did it. This is not something that was invented to be used as a racial slur. It was made by the Native Americans to refer to Native Americans, and for a long time it was the name that they preferred. So it's a really, really odd, it's a really strange hill to die on for the left. Now let's go to the more specific part of this. Because we've already talked about how the name Redskin, the word Redskin, isn't in itself bad, but what about the Redskins specifically? The team, the logo, all of that. Was that racist? Was that meant to be some kind of racial slur against Native Americans? Well, it turns out that the name and logo were both intended as tributes. Now, the name originally was the Washington Braves, the Boston Braves. The reason that was confusing is because there was already a Boston Braves that were a baseball team. And by the way, they later became the Atlanta Braves when the team moved. But there was already a Boston Braves, and back then the team was in Boston, and they were also the Braves, so it got super confusing, and they tried to come up with a name that would work, and they got together. By the way, the head coach of the Redskins at the time, or at the time the Braves, was Native American, and there were several Native American people that were actually players and staff members, and they all met together with the Native American staff and head coach and decided on a name that would work, which was Redskins. So the Native Americans there on staff were the ones that said, yeah, that's the name we'll go with. We want that to be a tribute to us. And then you fast forward a little bit later, the logo is actually modeled after a guy named Walter Blackie Wetzel. Blackie was his nickname. And he insisted that they change the logo from an R to a Native American profile. They were already called the Redskins, but you know how the Redskin logo is just a circle with the feathers on the side? Well, that's because originally it was just that circle with a red R in there. You know, kind of like you would see with the Braves, if they have the B or the Montgomery Biscuits, they'll have the big M. Well, originally that was their logo. It just had an R. It didn't have a Native American head, the one that we're familiar with today. It was Walter Blackie Wetzel that insisted that they change it, and they modeled the profile. It's not just an imaginary cartoon or a caricature. It's him. It's his face. His profile is the one that they used for that. And this is a guy who grew up on a reservation. He wasn't like an Elizabeth Warren Native American where he just claimed to have some Native American background. This is a guy that grew up with Native Americans and actually did grow up on a reservation. And this guy, the more I dug into his history, this is a fascinating dude. So Blackie Wetzel, this is from his obituary in 2003. Quote, Blackie was also very proud of being the force behind the Indian Chief logo of the Washington Redskins pro football team. Blackie and his Washington Redskins cap were inseparable. So this guy, which by the way, there's a little bit of narcissism going on there, but I'm going to excuse it because this guy is so cool. He was the model for the Redskin logo, and then they said you basically never saw him without it on. He just walked everywhere with his hat on. It was inseparable. He was proud of it. He wanted to wear it around. He wanted people to know that he had something to do with the logo being there. And I think that's really awesome, but just the guy's life is fascinating. I don't have time to go into everything and all the details, but the guy was a World War II vet, actually served in World War II, didn't see combat. He served stateside. But he did serve in World War II in the Air Force, and all throughout his college years, he was a boxer. So, I mean, this dude is tough as nails and about as American as it gets. I really, really like this guy. And he also passed the test to be an Air Force pilot. This is the reason that he didn't see combat, but unfortunately there was a health complication that kept him from being a pilot. He passed the test. He passed all the registration, which, I mean, you got to be a really, really tough dude. You got to be really on top of stuff to be able to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force in World War II. But he was cleared for all of that. He just wasn't able to go because there was a health complication that arose. It didn't actually say what it was, so I'm not sure. But anyway, that kept him from seeing combat. But man, this dude is tough as nails, and he's had such an interesting life. And on top of that, when he went back, not only was he of Native American descent, he was involved in tribal politics. He was named the chairman of the Blackfeet Nation, and then later he was president of the National Congress of American Indians in 1961. This is the person that Native Americans chose to represent them in Washington in the 1960s. And this is all happening while the civil rights movement is going on. I mean, it was an incredibly turbulent time for our country. Well, 1961 is a little bit early for that, but you know what I'm saying. It's the same kind of era. He actually met with President JFK. He referred to him as, I think, Climbing Eagle was or High Eagle was the name that he gave to him. He was friends with JFK, another World War II vet. And so this is somebody that was a leader in the Native American community, that he spent his life promoting the Native American community. He was American through and through. This is just such an interesting individual, and it kills me that they're just throwing all of that away because of all this politically correct nonsense. And what's crazy about this is not only was this guy, the guy whose picture was actually on the Redskins logo, not offended by this, and he saw it as a tribute, but Native Americans themselves saw it that way too. They thought of it as an honor. Washington Post took a poll in 2016 that showed 9 out of 10 Native Americans that they surveyed said that they were not offended by the Redskins name or the logo. And by the way, Washington Post, because they're a very far left-leaning publication, they actually took the survey over and over again trying to get different results. They took it year after year, and every year it came up, nope, Native Americans, not offended by it. Do you know how hard it is to get 9 out of 10 people to agree on freaking anything? I mean, especially in our current political climate, that's basically impossible. Do you get 9 out of 10 people to agree on anything, and all of them were like, nope, not offensive, doesn't bother us. And in fact, they also, in this same survey, they took a sort of like a word association portion of the survey, and they asked people that took the survey, the Native Americans that were involved in this, they asked, so what word would you most associate with it if you're not offended by it? You know what the number one response was? Proud. So it wasn't even indifference. They were proud of this being a tribute. They were proud of the way that Native American culture was put on display as a part of the sports franchise. And it is just a crying shame that that is gone now. That they're just not going to engage in it anymore. And the Wetzel family was devastated by this. I was reading something earlier, and it's interesting to me that all my sources on this came from local newspapers because the national news media doesn't want to talk about this. But the Wetzel family, the descendants of Blackie Wetzel, they were actually really upset by this. In fact, his son Lance said, and this is a direct quote, "It's disheartening. I wish they really would have considered at least sticking with the imagery. It's a depiction of a real Native American. As a kid growing up and being a Redskins fan, I've always seen that logo. Everyone I've been in contact with on the reservation has been positive about the logo's depiction. They think that's my team because it's a Native American." Native Americans identified with this. They loved this. They saw that as their team. And this is according to a guy that lives on a reservation, and his grandfather was the model for this. Let's look at his grandson. His grandson, Jake Wetzel, said this in a statement, quote, "It truly shows who my people are," talking about the logo here. "It would be really sad to see it go because the NFL is such a big platform that gives the Blackfeet tribe recognition." See, they're upset that you have now robbed them of their voice. We talk about elevating voices of color. Well, the political left just took a harpoon to that message. This was a giant platform where people could learn about the Blackfeet tribe, that it was something that they could be proud of, that it was part of their family history that they could put on display. And the left, in their attempt to elevate voices of color, wound up doing the exact opposite of that. It wound up destroying a platform that they had that they were proud of. But this is how leftism works. It destroys everything that it touches, whether it's good or not. And this is exactly the same thing that happened with Aunt Jemima. The family of Aunt Jemima was upset. They said, that's my family's legacy. And when you look at the history of Aunt Jemima, I'm not going to go into all that. I actually did a segment on that already. But, I mean, this woman was a freed slave. somebody that had overcome great adversity, and then later on, the people that became Aunt Jemima, the character, and played her later, every single one that I looked up were amazing women, entrepreneurs. One of them was the first black millionaire, the first female black millionaire in the United States history. And now that legacy is just completely washed away because, well, we've got to be politically correct. And black people, this is one thing that I found absolutely hilarious. Black people bought Aunt Jemima syrup 4-1. They were the demographic that by great lengths outweighed every single other demographic in buying it. So apparently it wasn't too racist for the black people that were buying Aunt Jemima syrup, just like it wasn't too racist for the 9 out of 10 Native Americans that are proud of the Washington Redskins and liked the fact that their people were represented in a sports team. Is there anything more patronizing than a bunch of angry, woke, white leftists telling the minorities what they're supposed to be offended by, whether it's black people with Aunt Jemima or whether it's Native Americans with the football team saying, no, we know better than you. You should be offended by this. Let us take care of that for you. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that for you because we know you're not, smart enough to make your own decisions or think for yourself. So we'll just go ahead and take care of that one for you. What a bunch of arrogant jerks. Seriously, I can't think of anything more racist or patronizing than that. If the Native Americans have a problem with it, let them say it. Obviously they weren't. Just drives me up a wall that they get rid of this. And here's the other thing too. This is something that just applies to the sports team side of this. Why would you assume that somebody naming a sports team or using imagery is something that is specifically meant to be a slur? Because wasn't that the whole Ole Miss thing? Now, granted, I'm not a big fan of Ole Miss, but that might have something to do with the fact that I've got 2 siblings at Miss State who absolutely despise Ole Miss. Maybe that's playing into it here. But I thought the whole reason that Ole Miss got rid of the Confederate imagery is because people thought of that as being a tribute and being Ole Miss basically saying, yeah, we're pro-Confederacy. Which, I mean, you could make the argument that it was. But if that's the case, then why are you assuming that this one is racist because it's trying to portray Native Americans in the same way? If that was a tribute to the Confederacy, and you were saying that was wrong because it's promoting the Confederacy, why would you not assume that the Redskins are promoting Native American culture by doing that? When you name a team something, I realize that a bunch of the woke leftists don't understand how sports work. But generally speaking, when you name a team something, that's because you like that thing and want to support it. The reason that I pull for the Braves is because I think the Braves are a really freaking cool mascot to have. But, with other things, with Auburn, I have Tiger stuff up in my living room because it's cool to be the Tigers. Tigers are cool. They're strong. There's something you can look up to and you want to cheer for the Tigers to win. Just like people want to cheer for the Redskins to win. Whenever you name a sports team after something, that should be considered a tribute. Now, I don't know what that says about the Duke Blue Devils. And maybe I got a little animosity there because I'm also a Kentucky fan. But nonetheless, I think that's a little sketchy. But even with the Devil Rays, which I'm a fan of, I had no problem with them keeping the name the Devil Rays. They shortened it to the Rays. But I mean, it's an animal. It's called the Devil Ray. Nobody thought you were supporting the devil by putting the Devil Rays on it. So all this stuff is just so stupid. The reason that they put it on there is because they liked Native Americans and wanted that imagery, and hey, that's the thing that we can root for. That's the thing that we want to win. The idea that it was somehow meant as a slur is just stupid. You don't see a bunch of white people of Nordic descent saying, oh, it's so terrible that the Minnesota Vikings represent our people incorrectly or they do it cartoonishly, which they actually do have a cartoon of a Viking on there. Again, I don't have a problem with it. I don't think any of the Nordic people have a problem with it. I'm not Nordic, or at least I don't think so. But, you don't see the French upset at the Xavier Musketeers. Oh, this is a racist basketball team. Because, Xavier basically doesn't have a football team. They might actually, I don't know. They're just not very well known. They're known for basketball. You don't see the French people getting all upset about that because it's a tribute. My family is descendant from a line of knights in Britain. I don't get upset when a sports team refers to themselves as the Knights. That's really cool. Frankly, I wish there were a team of knights that I could pull for because I like medieval stuff. This whole thing, everybody's just getting way too oversensitive about it, especially when something's supposed to be a tribute, something that's a good thing. But what this is really about, what it all boils down to, this is really about a bunch of angry, white, woke leftists that want to pat themselves on the back for doing something good. It has nothing to do with the Native Americans or how they feel, because if it did, then they wouldn't have gotten rid of it, for the reasons I just explained. This is so a bunch of woke white people can make themselves feel better. That's all it's about. That's frankly all most of political correctness is about. It's so they can pat themselves on the back and tell themselves how good they are for doing something like this, even if the people that they were protecting don't like it. Don't kid yourselves, leftists, that this is some kind of victory or this somehow helps the Native American people. This was about you and making yourselves feel good because you don't care about anybody else. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Our chaplain's report today is going to come from the book of 1 Samuel, and just to give you a little bit of background in case you haven't been following our series on Samuel, I highly recommend it. It's been so much fun for me. I love this book of the Bible, and I think that probably comes through in my chaplain's reports. But where we are in this saga, Saul is of course king, and he has been charged by God, been given direct orders from God, go out, destroy the Amalekites, destroy everything they have. Women, children, buildings, possessions, your animals, the king, everything. And a lot of people would look at that and say that it's cruel, but really the reason comes down to this. God did not want it in his people's mind that they were going after this for conquest. They were to be basically God's sword here on earth. That when these people had done something evil, when they had, and Amalekites were as bad as it get, they were engaged in things like child sacrifice and all kinds of horrible things. So what God wanted to do is to go out and use them as punishment to wipe them off the face of the earth, but he also didn't want them to get the idea, hey, we're doing this for conquest or so that we can get money. The reason that it was important to go ahead and destroy everything is because he didn't want them to think, oh, they were just doing this because they wanted something out of it. No. The message to the surrounding nations of the Amalekites is, this is divine retribution. You are going in there to destroy everything because it's about punishing them for their sin, not about you being able to get things from them. This is not conquest. We're not we're not going out here to spoil them. We're going out here to send a message to the other nations that you obey God and you do what he says to do. And if the pattern holds with this is after multiple prophets have been sent to them, they've been given warnings, all that kind of stuff. And so now it's finally past the point of no return. God tells Saul to go lead Israel's forces and to do this. But he doesn't obey. Instead of doing what God told him to do, he saves King Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and he also takes all the best livestock and brings them back for him. And he, by the way, also brings back some of the possessions that he was told to destroy. Now, let's look at that from this angle. I think that if Saul had disobeyed, and his disobedience had looked something like, God, you told me to destroy everything, but I got to tell you, I couldn't do it with the women and children. Like, I had to leave them alive. My conscience wouldn't allow me to do it. I have a feeling that God would have been a lot more lenient on him because of that. But that's not what Saul did. Saul destroyed the women and children, but he saved the king, possibly for ransom or possibly because Saul himself was a king and was hoping that nobody would come after him. And he kept the stuff and he kept the livestock. So basically, only the selfishly motivated stuff is what he saved. I got to believe that God, just based on his character and based on the way he's dealt with other situations, that if Saul had come back to him, that there might still have been some punishment for disobedience, but because Saul's heart was in the right place, God probably would have been a lot more merciful with what he did. But no, Saul was all about getting the stuff that he wanted at this point. And again, like we actually just said in our last one, Saul wasn't always like this. Saul wasn't always out for himself. There's times where Saul is incredibly selfless and does exactly what God asked him to do. Unfortunately, this is not one of those times. And so let's go ahead and that kind of sets the stage. Let's go ahead and look in in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 13 through 15, and see what that looks like. So 1 Samuel 15, 13 through 15. Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord." But Samuel said, "What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen that I hear?" Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen, to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed." This is actually a pretty humorous moment for Samuel. And frankly, it makes me feel better because being the smart aleck that I am, I kind of feel like Samuel and I have a connection here because I love how this is presented. Basically, I've done exactly what you commanded, Samuel. Destroyed everything, destroyed everyone. The Amalekites are done with now. And Samuel's like, odd, because I'm hearing some sheep and I'm hearing some oxen coming from the background. And then Saul's like, yeah, see, we brought the best sheep and oxen for sacrifice for God. And notice the way that he words that is specifically is the Lord, your God. Oh, your God that you worship. Yeah, we totally brought the sacrifices back for him. Right. Samuel's not buying this. And first of all, it's so abundantly transparent that Saul is eager to greet Samuel, and he comes up and he's like, "Oh yeah, we did exactly what God promised." It's kind of like the little kid that he's home, maybe with his parents outside or something, and he breaks something or winds up hurting his little brother or sister, and comes in and the kid meets his parent at the door. "Oh, everything's fine, and Timmy, he's not crying, and I didn't hurt him." And they can hear the kid crying in the background who's obviously like been punched in the jaw or something. This is the level of ridiculousness that Samuel walks into when he walks into Saul's camp. This is a pretty good analogy of what is probably going through Saul's mind. He's like, "Yep, totally obeyed God's commands. Nothing to see here. We're good." But Samuel knows what has happened. He's already spoken to God. We kind of skipped over that part in the scripture, but he's already spoken to God. He already knows what the deal is. He knows what to expect when he walks into this. It really is one of the funnier episodes in the Bible, which, I mean, anybody that says God doesn't have a sense of humor is not reading through all of the Bible or is definitely missed some of the more humorous stories here. But the interesting part here is that he claims that he obeyed the command. There's a couple different ways to read this. First of all, it could just be that Saul's trying to cover his behind because he knows he's in trouble. He knows he's done something wrong that he shouldn't have. I think that that's a pretty accurate reading. That tends to be the way that I read it. The other way to read it, which I think is less likely but also possible, is that in Saul's mind, he did obey the command. And unfortunately, this is not impossible because we see this in humans today too. Don't we see this with people all the time that they're like, "Yeah, well, basically I did more or less what God said to do." Yeah, well, he's God. You don't do more or less what he said to do. You either do what he said to do or you do something else. There is no in between here. There's no "I sort of obeyed God." There's either did you obey God or did you not obey God. He doesn't leave any halfway point. There's no room in the kingdom for fence straddlers when it comes to the kingdom of God. And this is a lesson that Saul is about to learn in absolutely no uncertain terms. And we'll get to some of the repercussions of that as we go throughout the book, but suffice it to say here before we do any of that, that this is just a very human reaction to all of this. Whether it was Saul really knew that he screwed up and did something that he shouldn't have, but he didn't want to own up to it, which is kind of the way that I look at it, or it's more from the standpoint of Saul just kind of justified the fact that he disobeyed. Maybe it's a little of both. I really don't know, but either way, there's a powerful lesson there for us, regardless of how you read it. Because if you read it the first way, you kind of look back at Adam, where Adam's like trying to lie to God on whether or not he sinned or not, going back to the very first sin of man. This is something that is just a part of human nature. That the first thing we do is try to blame others, and we also try to defer any responsibility. Yeah, this wasn't really my fault, or yeah, I more or less did what God told me to do. Just like the serpent brings up to Eve, well, God said that you're allowed to eat the fruit in the garden. Let's just kind of ignore that part where he told you not to eat of this particular fruit. That's kind of what's going on here. Well, did God really say to destroy all the Amalekites and all of their livestock and the king? Yeah, he did. And you don't get to just decide that God doesn't know best. You don't get to just decide that I'll do my own thinking and I'll just refer to that as being obedient to God's command because I got the gist of it. I more or less did what God asked me to do. No, he's God. You either did it or you didn't do it. This is a being that knows everything, that is all-powerful, that knows what is best, and what you're doing is second-guessing his judgment. You're saying that I, as the human, am standing at a better place of judgment here to make this call than you, God. See, Saul's sin here is disobedience, but it's also arrogance. He thought he knew better than God, that he could make the call that God couldn't. It's not a good place to be for us. It just shows a lack of trust in your Father. Sometimes as little children, when we have like a medical problem, let's say, and we have to go in and get a shot, like a vaccination, you see, a 4-year-old doesn't understand that he really does need the shot, and the shot really is best for him. Like, he can't wrap his mind around why there is any good reason to stick a needle in his arm since it hurts so much. But he has enough faith in his parent to say, I don't like it, I don't want to do it, and maybe he even fights back on it. I don't know. I'm sure that there are kids that do that. But ultimately, they have enough trust, or at least many of them do, enough trust that their parent, who has always looked out for them, that has loved them, that wants what's best for them, if he says, I have to get the shot, okay, I have to get the shot, even if I don't really understand why I have to get the shot. That's what Saul failed to do here. He decided that his judgment was better than God's, that he didn't really need God to make this decision for him. It was a bad call, and we'll see the fallout of that later on. And if we want to see the fallout of that play out in our lives, all we have to do is just mostly do what God said instead of doing what he actually said to do. See, it all goes back to faith in our Father and respect for his commands. Stay the course, friends. Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media or our business partners. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Video production by Jackson Dean. Broadcast studio provided by Faulkner University. Location studio provided by the Dalreda Church of Christ.